Steve Peterson here with Infinity Investments, and welcome to our channel where we talk all things commercial and investment real estate. In today's video, we're going to be talking about 3 lessons investors learn way too late when doing 1031 exchanges. And the number one thing is the part where you've got there's a common saying in the 1031 exchange world that you have to spend the cash and replace the debt. A lot of people who are doing 1031 exchanges are looking to move towards retirement. And a lot of investors, when moving towards retirement, want to minimize their debt load. So a lot of people like to sell a building and pay cash for something else. Nothing wrong with that if the property you sold doesn't have any more debt associated with it. If there's a debt mortgage on the property when you sell it, you got to replace that amount of debt on the next property. The saying is you got to spend the cash and replace the debt. And if you were to just simply take the cash you had and buy more properties, you're going to be short in terms of replacing that debt. And so you're going to have something called mortgage boot, which is the worst kind of boot of all time, meaning that you're going to pay taxes on the amount of that debt that you did not replace. It's nothing worse than paying tax on mortgages that you didn't replace, because that's something that you simply can do. And you're not paying tax on the money. See, if you pay tax on the money, meaning that you didn't fulfill your exchange, at least you got the cash in your hand. But if you have to pay a mortgage boot, that means that now you've taken your cash and invested it, and you have to pay capital gains tax, which is what you were trying to defer in the first place. So it's really, really important that you got to sit down and map out what your exchange looks like before you list the property. That's very, very important. It's a simple thing, and you're gonna have to carry some debt on the next property. But even if you roll into like a DST investment with a large firm that is buying into institutional grade properties, they're gonna have a debt allocation for you depending upon how much debt you need to replace, because most of them are going to have 50% equity, 50% debt, or somewhere maybe 60-40 ratio in terms of debt and equity. So they'll have a loan that they can allocate you a percentage of, depending upon your percentage of ownership that you get when you invest into the deal. The bottom line is you got to have a debt allocation, and a lot of investors miss that because a lot of investors are simply looking at just, let me pay cash for something, let me eliminate this mortgage risk. Because that is a risk that we have in real estate investing. You have a mortgage, there's a little bit of risk. If people stop paying rent, that mortgage still needs to get paid. So that's really, really, really important in the sense of, hey, you need to make sure you either have a mortgage that lined up or set up, you can obtain financing, you get a price. If you can't, you get a property that has seller financing, or you invest into a DST, you have to invest in one that has debt, which most of them do, so you can get a debt allocation. All right? Very, very important. And that's the first lesson. And a lot of investors miss this, guys. A lot of investors miss this, and they usually miss it after the 45-day identification period. Because after 45 days, from the time you close escrow, 45 calendar days, you cannot go back and re-identify what you're doing. Now, what you can do is you can identify the property, and maybe you were paying all cash, maybe you can put a loan on it, maybe you can figure some things out, but you really need to have this dialed in before the 45th day passes. You know what you're buying, you know how much equity and how much debt that you need to replace. So that's lesson 1. Lesson 2 is that if you are going to identify more than 3 properties, right? There's a 3 property, you can identify up to 3 properties, and that value can be whatever. We know, or at least what is known in the business, is when you sell a property, let's say for $1 million, you need to replace $1 million or more of value when you purchase the next building. So if you sell a $1 million property, you have to buy $1 million worth of properties or more in order to fully qualify the exchange. And you also have to do what we just talked about. You've got to spend the cash and you've got to replace the debt, right? However, if you want to identify more than 3 properties, now you have to use what's called the 200% rule. And the 200% rule states that You can identify as many properties you want to identify, so long as the aggregate value of all those properties does not exceed 200% of the property that you sold. So again, let's say you sold $1 million property, and you're going to identify 4 buildings, more than 3. Now you've got to use the 200% rule, which restricts you a little bit, because now that the aggregate, the total of those 4 properties can only be $2 million, 200% of the $1 million property that you sold. So that's important, and a lot of people miss this. Now, if you got a good qualified intermediary, you have to fill out the exchange paperwork, the identification paperwork. They're going to walk you through that, and you should be able to navigate that. The problem, though, you need to know that going in, because you don't want to be on the 45th day writing down, oh, we're going to identify these 4 properties, and it's 300% of what you identified, and you're planning on buying them all. Or you don't know which one you're buying because you're in due diligence and you're still trying to figure it out. You just don't want that. You want to get that wake-up call on the 45th day. That's very important, and I think it's something that we got to spend time up front on thinking about as you go and identify. Now, there is an exception to this rule, the 200% rule. Like if you identify more than that, if you identify properties that are more than 200%, you gotta buy every single deed. And it's a little bit of a greatness in terms of talking to qualified intermediaries on this one, but always a little bit of a I don't want to say a gray zone, but there's a little bit of nuance to that rule, that if you did identify more than 200%, the only problem is you gotta buy everything, in order to be fully tax deferred. And I think as much as we possibly can, when we're doing these exchanges, we should simplify things, because at the end of the day, the biggest part of this exchange is finding a better asset to exchange into. Making sure your replacement property that you purchase is better, or the replacement properties that you purchase are better assets than the one you sold. That is a hunt, that is a fight, something you gotta have a really good team to do in order to execute. So you don't want to be confused about these little nuances while you're in that hunt. You want to be dialed in, you want to be focused, you want to make sure you find that right property. Really, 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 really important on that. So a little bit, the 3 property rule, you can identify up to 3 properties, any value. So that is recommended, but where a lot of people who end up going with the 200% rule run into issues is, well, not issues, but if you want to buy a portfolio of properties, and you're buying a portfolio, maybe it's one deal, but it's made up of multiple properties. Each APN that you identify is its own property. So if you're buying a package deal with 5 properties, and you think they're marketed as one deal, it's still 5 properties. So a lot of people like to buy portfolios. That's where they run into trouble. Just know what you're going into up front, so you don't get caught on that 45th day trying to figure out which way is up, because no one wants to get caught in that cycle at all, while you're in the middle of your exchange. All right, and lesson number 3, when that investors learn too late about 1031 exchanges, is that partnerships, group investments, TICs, DSTs, when they sell, they've got to stay together in order to exchange. So when a partnership, let's just say, selling a property, and there's 3 LLC, and there's 3 members of the LLC, sell that property, and then each member goes its own way, which a lot of times people do. You get together, you make some money, fantastic, now we're going a different way. Or you get together, you hate each other, you want to put somebody in the headlock, we got to sell this property, go our separate ways. All right, fine, let's sell it. If you go your separate ways, that's cool, but it's going to be extremely difficult to impossible to exchange. And in fact, you really can't exchange individually that way, all right? Because you have to exchange. When you sell a property, whatever that entity is, you need to bring that entity to the next deal, and it needs to have the same makeup as it did when you owned it. Now, there's some ways that you can structure your LLC before you sell the property to try to make this happen. But here's the reason why I say this is a lesson that people will learn too late, Because when you're in escrow, selling that building, when you're in your 45-day identification period, is when most people figure this out, and it's too late. You know, if you're going to do any maneuvering with your LLC to make sure that you guys can exchange, or you can exchange, and because you wanted to stay invested, maybe you're saying, hey, I love this deal. These guys want to sell. Hey, if I'm going to sell, I need to buy something else. I don't want to buy something else and have to pay taxes. That's not cool. A lot of people figure that out in the middle of escrow. And it's too bad. It's too late at that point, because you're not going to be able to execute on that 1031 exchange. Really, really important. You got to stay dialed into this. And like I said, before you sell a property, if you want to maneuver the LLC or maybe buy someone out or figure out what you can do, you want to talk to your qualified intermediary who's handling your exchange, you want to talk to your CPA, you want to talk to some attorneys who are handling your entities to figure that out. But don't get in the middle of exchange where you got 2 or 3 partners and you guys are going your separate ways and think that you're going to be able to individually exchange. It ain't going to work like that. So I hope this is helpful. And the goal of me doing these videos is to put some content out there to the marketplace. A lot of people are doing exchanges. I think a lot more people are going to be doing exchanges out of California and other states. And so we need to understand these things. You need to have a really good team of people on your team. It starts with real estate brokers to sell and help you to buy, CPAs, attorneys, if you're looking in the DST route, companies that do DSTs, and make informed decisions so you can accomplish the goal of an exchange, which is to sell one property and buy a better asset or assets. And in the process, defer your capital gains taxes. Hope this was helpful. If it is, throw me a like, subscribe to the station, stay tuned in, share with some friends. Be blessed, and best of success to your investing career.